Well, what's up? Welcome to Air Check Your Life, a podcast where we talk about three questions. What's going okay that needs a tweak? What's going on that's probably costing you an audience? And here's the most important question. What are you getting right? There are things in your life that are going the right way. And we're going to do that today with this guy right here on the right side of me. His name is Travis Hahler. He's the author of this book right here called Rethink Resistance, which is currently flirting with the #1 position on the bestsellers list. And I want to jump right into this conversation, Travis. And in your book, you talk about resistance. And I love this because you say resistance isn't personal, it's protective. So I want to know, when did you realize that resistance was not the enemy, but simply information? And let's spend a few minutes talking about this.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on the show. This is amazing. It was interesting because I think I realized it before I knew what the words were to describe it. And I think that happens a lot with people, right? Early on, when I was consulting with large clients, I was watching other folks that would look at it as a checklist of things to be done, ways that they're going about it. They're saying, okay, we got to do this and this and this and this. And then when ultimately people would resist, or there would be pockets of that resistance, it became a battle of, okay, we got to fight that resistance. We got to fight that resistance. And, for me, I kind of naturally gravitated towards those groups and started asking really curious questions. Things like, do you understand what the change means for you? And if that's the case, is that why you're resisting? Is it something that we're not giving to you? Is that why there's resistance here? Or what can we do to help? And those questions really quickly told us a lot. And so what I found over time and over doing that, and then I later kind of proved in my hypothesis, was that most of the time people were not trying to resist. They were very naturally resistant because they were protecting themselves from unknowns, from fear, from potential threat, rather than actually saying, I don't want to do that. And so that, early on is when I kind of started seeing that. It wasn't until, let's see, 10 years ago that I actually started putting words to that.
I want to ask you a question. So, Air Check, it's all about information, and it's this whole idea that we're just using it as feedback so that we can get better. But here's what I want to ask you, because look, this isn't just about what leaders do to their employees. It's also about what employees do to their leaders. It's about what employees do for each other, what leaders do when they're in leader rooms. So why is it that you think that, let's start with leaders. Why do you think that leaders get so defensive when we just give them feedback and information?
Oh, that's such a great question. Well, first, I think we have to start off with, how do people become leaders?
Okay.
Oftentimes, it's not what a lot of people believe it is, right? Oftentimes we're like, oh, well, they have all these great leadership qualities and they're great natural leaders, right? That's not typically the people that are getting leadership roles on the mass, right? Typically it's because they were really good at executing something and someone said, you should lead other people to execute that thing. And then pretty soon they're in a leadership role. So I think a lot of it comes from two things. One, there's an aspect of leaders are not bred, right? Like, we don't train them up to be leaders. We kind of force them into leadership roles and they don't have the skills, and that creates their own fear, their own potential threat of having someone push against them and ask questions. The second part for me is around the leaders that are great leaders and they're natural leaders, and those folks, a lot of times there's some ego in that. And that's a good thing to have ego in leadership, because you have to, in order to be able to get people to believe in you, follow you. But with natural resistance, a lot of leaders expect people to get on board right away and be excited, and they try to sell them on it really quickly. Natural resistance happens very fast, and it happens kind of startlingly to a lot of leaders. And so when they see that happen, they see that pushback, their natural instinct is to push harder. And so it's not necessarily defensive, but they're like, you're not following me, you don't understand, you're not on board with me, I need to push you to get there. And that's kind of a natural instinct, I think, for a lot of leaders.
Yeah, and I would say, look, my experience tells me, Travis, that that a lot of leaders. I like how you said that we haven't bred them, we haven't groomed them, we haven't put them through the proper training to be a leader. But you also said that word, that three little letter word called ego, and look, does that play a part in it? For sure, but not from the standpoint that you may be thinking I'm talking about. I'm talking about when somebody gets that leadership title, they almost think like, I have to know it all. And I have to have all the answers at when anybody comes to me, I just have to have the answer. And if I don't know the answer, I'm not a leader. Like, I think they put that story in their head, which is a false story. As a matter of fact, this morning I was at a breakfast for Accelerant, and we had a Top Gun fighter pilot who was doing like this keynote talk. And he was saying that one of the fundamentals of a great Top Gun fighter pilot is that they are humble and they are honest. And he defined that as when they don't know the answer to a question, they will say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out the answer and I'm going to get back to you on this. And I think it's a great leadership lesson for people to hear, is that you don't need to know it all. And when somebody comes to you and they have a problem that you can't solve, like, that's okay. To me, it's the perfect opportunity to get in the trench with them, because as I always say, it's not you versus me, it's you and me versus the problem. And if we can adapt that mindset, man, boy, we shift everything and we become partners. I want to move into this other piece of your book, which is out right now, and you write about the brain preferring the familiar. And I feel like we could spend 10 minutes alone just on this particular topic. From your vantage point, and look, guys, I want to be clear about this. This Travis guy's got some creds, right? He's got you got a master's from Harvard? Is that what that is, or just a separate degree from Harvard?
Just a separate degree from Harvard.
Yeah, but in neuroscience, and so he studied this on almost all of the levels. And so, from what you've learned, Travis, what can you share with our audience about why people cling to routines that aren't serving them anymore, especially the ones that aren't serving them anymore? Why do they choose the familiar from what you've learned?
Well, there's so many reasons, but the big one is the fact that our brains are, if we really think back to like what our brains are designed to do, and I think we think about them in terms of their computing power today, in terms of what we can accomplish and the way that we work and all of that. But what they were truly designed for early on was truly to keep us alive and survive. So some of the things that are the best at keeping people alive or keeping things alive is the familiar. And so the brain has a tendency to prefer that because it doesn't pose a threat. Every day, if you knew every day you got up, you brushed your teeth, you went to work, you came home, you had dinner, you went to sleep, there's not a lot of deviation in that. And so your brain says, okay, I feel pretty confident that we're on the right path to safety throughout our day-to-day tasks, right? When you change that, it opens up an entirely new level of potential. It's potential problems, potential threats, potential issues, ambiguity, all of that. And so your brain kind of drives you down the same road that you're used to. And the other part of that too is that changing how we do something takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy. And so our brain is saying, okay, I want to keep you on the familiar because we know that that's probably our safest route because we've done it time and time again. But now you want to deviate. It's not only potentially threatening, it's also, I'm going to use a lot of energy that I may need should a threat arrive. And so in those two places, you have a lot working against you to break away from the familiar.
It makes me want to follow up with this question, Travis, which is, how can we at work and even at home, how can we create safer environments for people to make change? Because it feels like that's what we have to do when change presents itself. We have to make people feel safer to make those changes.
It's the one question that makes me extremely unpopular, Matthew, if I'm going to be really honest, because the answer is time. And people hate that. And you know who hates that the most? Executives at companies. because we don't have time, right? And so the hardest part about it is the only way to make it feel safer is to feel like you have the time and the actual space to start to play, adapt, kind of work with it a little bit, whatever that changes, and get yourself used to it, build those habits back, and actually learn. Now, we don't always have that time or give ourselves that time. And oftentimes we don't try to change one thing. And I think that's one of the, if you take all of the books on habits that exist, and there's a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
Almost every single one says that the changes should be either small or by themselves. So it's either lots of little small changes that you can make together, or they need to be one change by itself that you're focused on. And we oftentimes overload on the number of changes that we're trying to make. It's not just, I want to go to the gym more. It's, I want to go to the gym, drink more water. I want to,
lose weight.
I want to do more
Eat
protein,
right.
lose weight, do this, do that, do that. I don't just want to go to the gym. I want to ride bike too. Like, we try to stack these things. And one of those is already hard enough. So we don't do ourselves any favor.
So good. So good. We're on with Travis Hahler today. Rethink Resistance is the name of his book. It's available right now. I wonder if you can answer this question. What is one old habit that you've experienced inside organizations that feels safe, but is actually costing people time, trust, performance, momentum?
So I did a lot of work in technology implementations early on in my career. Still a big part of, every company, but a lot of people, when you go through a technology implementation, they'll quietly semi-commit, right? They'll say, oh, okay, I'll do that. You're right. That new ERP or that new CRM system, I will definitely use that system. And then on the side, they'll say, but I don't quite trust that I'm going to just use that system. So they do secondary work. They keep their spreadsheet. They keep some form of record that's outside of this new way of working. And a lot of people think, well, that's safe. I'm creating safety for myself. The reality, though, is that what you're doing is you're doing double the work. And that amount of work exhausts even more of your energy. So it actually prolongs your ability to adopt this new system, this new way of working, this new method, because you're using half of your energy in maintaining something that no longer serves. And so a lot of people think
such a great answer, man. Oh, it's such a great answer, because what I wrote down was commit. Like, like go all in. You actually make it harder on yourself when you tiptoe in the water. Like, it's like I cold plunge, right? And people think I'm crazy because I cold plunge. And look, the first time I did it, I only went into my knees and I made it worse for myself. Now, when I get in the cold plunge, I go all the way in and it sucks for a second, but then the reward is just fine after. Can we spend a few minutes talking about communication? It is, as a former radio and television personality, it's the one thing that I am the most passionate about helping people understand now is not communication, because I think we all have the ability to talk to each other, but do we necessarily have the ability to have effective communication, productive communication? And I want to talk, okay, I want to get to two places, but let's start with this. Why do leaders think that they've communicated enough when their people still feel confused and anxious? And I'll give you a stat to back this up. Something like 47% of leaders say they think they communicate effectively, but only like 22% of their employees feel that way. And so clearly something is getting missed here. And so let's talk about that. Leaders think they've communicated one way, but it's not landing another way. What does your brain tell us about that?
Well, I mean, there's an entire chapter in the book about communication. And the reason is because it's so incredibly important and we discount it all the time. And so there's a couple of things with communication that I think are so critical if you're a leader and someone who's going, helping a team through a change or helping others through a change. It's, first off, to build trust in that what you're saying is true and honest, you need to be transparent. That scares a lot of people. It scares a ton of leaders, right? Same with the reason that they're scared to be vulnerable in a leadership role and think that they have to know all the answers. They're worried that being too transparent is going to potentially, they're going to say something that they can't or shouldn't.
Can I pause you there and ask you to explain transparency through your lens?
Absolutely. Transparency is sharing what you can share and then acknowledging what you can't.
Okay.
And I think that second part is the key. People oftentimes share what they can share and ignore the fact that there's a missing need that people are curious about. So like if I tell you, hey, the world's going to end, and I stop. Your next question is, okay, when? And I'm not acknowledging the fact that I don't know. I actually don't have the answers for that. Or I do know, but I can't tell you. So it's that secondary part that's really important to acknowledge, that maybe there is something that people are curious about or want to know, but you're either not able to share it or you don't have that information. That's transparency in the way that I look at it through the lens of change and communication.
Okay, I'll let you pick back up your answer, but I just thought it was important to pause there and define that for people. So, okay, back to transparency in the conversation.
No, I really appreciate that. And so if we think about that transparency, that's how you build trust, that what you say is true. You do what you say you're going to do, all of that. There's another part of it, though, that's really important, that is what most leaders miss. And that's why you have that stat. That's why you have almost 50% say, well, I've communicated effectively. And 20% are like, no, you haven't. It's because they believe that saying it once or maybe twice is enough. Frequency and transparency paired together is the key combination for communicating. And that frequency is important. And what a lot of leaders end up doing is they start with frequency and then they stop. So they, in the very beginning, they'll say, here's the change. Don't worry, we're going to talk about it during our weekly stand-up call or whatever it is. And they do it for like 2 times. And then they're like, we've talked about it enough. There's not a ton of changes from what we've said before. I'll just ad hoc tell you about it when new things happen. What that frequency does for the brain is it creates safety. It creates a space where I can come. I know Matthew has this meeting every week. I have a question. It's a Friday. That meeting's on a Wednesday. I can wait till the meeting. 3 days is not going to kill me. If I don't know when that meeting happens, I start to go and ask other people. I start to spiral a little bit and trying to determine what is happening in my own brain. So it's that safety that frequency creates that's so essential to people feeling like they have the information that they need, or they know where to get it. And I think it's that second part that's really, really, really important.
Okay. So Travis Hahler, the book is called Rethink Resistance. As we wind down here over the next couple of minutes, one thing that I loved about the book was the idea that even positive change can involve loss. No more was this more apparent in my own life, Travis, than when I decided to walk away from my 28-year radio and television career. That was a very positive change for me, for my mental health, for my emotional health, for my spiritual health, for my physical health. But it did involve a major loss. I had to walk away from really the only thing that I knew how to do and loved doing since I was 9 years old. So I want to spend just our last couple of moments talking about that idea of, even though it's a positive change, you may have to give something up. There may be something that you have to lose in order to gain. Can you help us understand why that's such an important concept to latch onto?
Well, I think there's, anytime you make a change, you have to shift away from something. There's no change if everything stays the same, right? So that loss exists, whether it's small, big. And sometimes the weird thing about loss is that it doesn't hit you in that moment either. And, you know, I have a friend who recently moved, and, well, I should say recently, it was almost a year ago at this point. But, you know, we were talking and she mentioned, you know what? I love where we live. I love the job. I love where my kids go to school. I really love the house. I love everything about where we live. And yet I find myself still grieving our life back in our old home. And they moved states, so it was a very different move. And she's like, it shows up in weird ways sometimes. I'm like, it does. And so with that loss and that grief, a lot of times when we're going through change, we don't give ourselves the moments, especially when it's a positive change, to actually acknowledge and give the space for that loss that is occurring, and we end up kind of dealing with it later, or it kind of sits there and just kind of simmers. It never really goes away. And so to your point, like, I've been through many changes myself, moving to a new city, starting a new job. I did both of those things at once. Actually, I did that 3 times in my career. Every time I was excited for the new job, I was excited for the new city. And every time I was like, oh my gosh, I'm anxious, I'm nervous. I don't know why. I feel like this is a great move, but that loss was important for me to acknowledge and to actually give some time to.
Well, and don't you think it's important for leaders too to acknowledge that there's going to be loss when we change? I mean, if you're trying to get your employees to come on with me here, I think leaders could do a better job of explaining, hey, look, I know the old way felt familiar, and I know the old way was something that you all got used to, but now we have this new system, and here are the reasons that we need to adopt it. I just think that leaders could do a better job acknowledging that there's loss. And here's the other thing that you kind of mentioned earlier, Travis, which is, and that takes time. It takes time to grieve that loss and to get over it. All right. Final question for you. When people finish the book, which is on the screen right now, if you're watching on YouTube, called Rethink Resistance, what do you hope they do differently the next time somebody pushes back?
It's a great question. For me, I think that the sign of the book being successful is that when someone pushes back on you during a change, you get curious. You start to ask questions. You start to really put yourself in their shoes and think, I wonder what they're going through. Not, oh my gosh, they're so difficult. How do we get them to just get on board? I think curiosity. If your first instinct is curiosity, my gosh, I feel like I should probably get a Nobel Prize, because that would be the greatest moment for me, is if people really started getting curious in those moments.
Such a good answer, man. It's so clear to me. And look, I interview people, every week, Travis, and it's so clear to me that you've put so much thought into this book, because your answers are succinct and they make sense, and they're exactly what people need to do. It's like, I know you want to have a different reaction, but what Travis is telling you here with get curious is the thing that will ultimately make life better for everyone. And I always explain it when I'm on the stage. I say it like, there's a reason crime shows are so popular. People love to solve a crime. So get curious. Like, let's get in there and do some investigating and figure out where this came from. All right. Nobody gets out of this podcast without answering these 3 questions, Travis. So you're on the hot seat for these final questions, and we're going to air check your life right now. And we're going to say to Travis, what are you getting right? Give me one thing in your life that you are getting right at this moment.
Ooh, it's a great question. I'm being a really good dad. I've got a toddler. He's loving life right now in the summer. I'm loving every minute of that. And I feel like I'm getting that right. He's growing, he's learning, he's doing all the things.
Enjoy the ride. What is one thing that's going on in your life right now that's okay, and you are actively kind of tweaking it to try to make it better?
Oh, that's a great question. For me, I think it's the way that I'm able to show up across the different things that I have going on. So, okay, I run a team, I have a business, I'm a dad, all 3 of those. And I think actively trying to make sure that those are balanced and in a way that serves the end person that is impacted by those things.
Yeah, man. Well, we're all figuring it out in that space. And then the final question in the air check is, what are you doing in your life right now? And this requires a little vulnerability, so please go there. That you're not getting right at this moment, that it is something you are actively working on because you know that you're not where you want to be.
It is a great question. It is a little vulnerable, but that's okay, because vulnerability is so important. And I think I mean, you read the book. I talk about it in probably 4 chapters, 4 of the 6 chapters that talk about solutions. It all talks about vulnerability. For me, I think working in tech, one of the things that's very challenging is that we hire amazing people, and they are usually pretty adaptable and pretty flexible. In my line of work, that should be a great thing. But in my line of being in tech, we oftentimes over rotate on that. And so our leaders will say, but our people they just do it. Like when we were a startup and we decided to just switch directions at a whim, they just did it. And so for me, the thing that I think could be going better, that I'm wanting to continue to work on, is how do we continue to get our leaders to understand that adaptability and change are not one cancels the other out. Adaptability is great, but they still need support with the change, regardless of how adaptable they are.
Amazing answer. Travis Hahler, the book is out. It's called Rethink Resistance. Really appreciate you dropping by today. Good luck. I know you're like flirting with #1 on the best on the bestsellers list. So let's hope we push you over the top, man. And anytime you want to come back and podcast together, just let me know. Okay.
I love it. Thank you so much for having me.